Good morning, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you for joining us. And I'm going to let Mike open us up.
All right. Good morning, or I guess good afternoon, good evening for some of those in different parts of the world. Welcome to our first uh, webinar for the Social Emotional Physical Safety Institute. We're excited to be launching this, and our plans are to have many more. So thanks for joining us, and we'll go ahead and get started. And just a quick agenda. Our target is to be about 45 minutes. We have a lot of content to cover, but I know that particularly with Jessica, who's an expert in a lot of this stuff, you'll enjoy hearing about all the things that we have to share this morning. So a little bit about the Social Emotional Physical Safety Institute was really, it's a nonprofit that we started out of a ClearPath EPM, which is the company that I founded, and it really came out of this idea, really starting with Jessica when I first met Jessica about almost 2 years ago when I was working with her at her school in Guayaquil, where she's the head of school, and the conclusion I came to was sort of this epiphany that, wow, really we're amplifying how the importance of the social, emotional, physical safety is for all students and staff. And so, Jessica is one of my favorite people. And the more and more we talk, it's like we really need sort of a nonprofit that we can get going to sort of lead some of the research into this arena. So here we are, our first institute. Of course, Dr. Jessica, we had to get her to launch this because she is just awesome. A little bit about self safety. You can see our mission and our statement. If you, by the way, everybody that would like, please put in your email address, and we'll make sure that we'll get you a copy of the PowerPoint. And also, we're going to have the recording posted on our website and on LinkedIn. So anyway, so the idea behind SEP Safety is to promote the social, emotional, physical safety by enhancing knowledge of professionals. And so our goal is to, in the school context, is to create this really holistic, integrated safety. Think of it as an umbrella almost, in terms of all the different programs that fall under that umbrella that help hold the umbrella up for safety. And as I mentioned, I'm the founder of ClearPath EPM, which is our commercial entity where we do a lot of work with schools and organizations around the world. And so a lot of the information that we're sharing in SEP Safety came out of the work that we've done in ClearPath. So for those of you that in international schools, if you go to the ClearPath EPM website, you'll see under Prepare My School, you'll see a safety playbook that's free to download to anybody interested. And it's kind of the philosophy of ClearPath EPM and the programs that we put forth. And there's a lot of information that's valuable to schools around the world. So safety and security. So you think about, I use this word interchangeably quite a bit. The truth is, if you drill down, safety is really about being proactive and preventive in nature. If you think about a fire extinguisher, for example, that's a safety element, right? It's there in the event that you need to respond to something. First aid kits, that's all part of safety. Security is more of that fences, walls, cameras, guards, responsive type. So we often interchange the two words, but really it's all about the safety aspect. As again, that overall we want to prevent and be proactive. Turn it over to Jessica. Jessica, you want to do a brief intro of where you are and who you are?
Yes. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm Dr. Jessica Gilway, and I am the executive director at Inter-American Academy in Guayaquil, Ecuador. And I've been here for 2 years. Previous to that, I was in Santa Cruz, Bolivia for 4 years as the executive director. And I've also worked in the United States in urban education. And so I have a lot of experience in the areas of social emotional learning. And when I was my first year as a school director in Western North Carolina, I realized that I couldn't be a school director without having a graduate certificate in counseling. And so I went and I got one because I realized that I needed one to be successful at my job. And so in that process of doing that work, I really learned a lot about the social, emotional, and physical components of safety in schools, and really the spaces that we want to create for children. And so today we're going to briefly dive into each of those. And I'm going to tell you, I want to bring each of these to life with a little bit of a story. And so I want to tell you a story to start about one of our students. And I'm going to call her Josefa. That's not her name, but in terms of safety and security. So we're in Guayaquil, Ecuador, and we're a smaller sized school. And the opinion is every child should be known, and we should know what's going on with every single child. And that's a great idea and concept, but it's harder in practice because people are quiet about what's happening in their lives. And so we've worked a lot over the last couple of years on belonging and on the idea of belonging. And I put the word map on there because really this idea of belonging is that you have family, you have friends, you have home, you have love, you have acceptance, you feel a sense of fitting in. But there's also this notion of academic belonging. So we had a major incident with Josefa 2 weeks ago, where she grabbed somebody by the collar and she shoved them across the room. And she's in 4th grade. And you're like, wow, what's going on with her? So we did a whole investigation on what was going on. She met with the counselors. We took all of these pieces and we resolved the situation. And then my principal and I were sitting in the office and someone said to us, well, have you heard what's happening with her parents, with her family? And we said, no, what's happening with her family? What's going on? And they said, well, mom had a baby with someone else and is now living with someone else. And the children are with dad and they're just with dad. And so there's a lot going on for Josefa. And all of a sudden it dawned on me, she doesn't have a sense of social safety. She doesn't have a place where she feels a sense of belonging right now. Because school it was her place, but she's struggling with what's going on at home, and that's causing her some challenges. And so as we think about the idea of social safety, we really think about it as social connectedness and belonging. And we're introducing each of these components because all of them play an important and essential part in children, not just surviving in school environments, but thriving and flourishing, because that continually is our goal. And so if we think about Josefa and we use her as a case study, we have to create a sense of community around her, but also around her dad, who right now is doing this by himself, and around her brother, who is also having issues, but we had no idea what was going on at home. And these are social issues because within Latin American context, as within many collectivist cultures, when these things happen, people keep them quiet because there's a sense of embarrassment or shame. And so that loss of community can sometimes be even more deep and profound culturally, because there's a sense of shame over what has happened. And there's a strong currency that follows that's traded in gossip. And so we have to work to surround that child, to surround Josefa. And I give you her name to give you a sense and a picture of creating a sense of community and the importance of those learning spaces being inclusive learning spaces for all children, regardless of what they're experiencing socially. But also, sometimes when we're experiencing challenging safety situations, for us personally or within our environment, we need intentional encouragement of positive interactions. And we proactively teach those as a school through positive behavior supports and interventions. And I'm happy to provide you some additional resources on that if it's helpful. But I think about Josefa and I think, okay, How do we put her in the middle of the circle? There she is. And how do we surround her with the things that she needs to feel a sense of social safety? So the first thing is connectedness to peers. She is not feeling connected at home, so she needs that connection to peers. And so we have to be really intentional in putting her in a tier 2 social group so that she can have that connection in a small group environment that feels safe. Connecting her to her environment. There needs to be a safe space within her environment, in her classroom environment, but also at school where she can go when she doesn't feel safe. She needs to feel connected to trusted adults. And she gets to define and to identify who those are. Because right now, some of the adults in her life are letting her down. And she doesn't feel a sense of safety. So we need to help her determine to build those skills on who are her trusted adults. But she also needs to feel valued and respected. Because once again, some of the adult dysregulation that's happening in her life is challenging her sense of value and dysregulation. I'm not wanted. I'm not desired. But the fact that every family is different and the way it's made up is different. And sometimes we do have stepbrothers and sisters, and sometimes we have stepfathers and brothers, and sometimes we just live with mom or dad or grandma. Those differences in the way our social community is built should be respected and honored. And we need to lift those up, and we need to bring those into the classroom and honor them in the stories that we read and the text that we use. But once again, and I think that this is so key and so important at international schools like the one I work at, is this positive opportunity to interact socially through clubs, through structured social events, even structured play at recess, and extracurriculars. And the reason I say that is because this is not a child who feels right now a sense of social safety. And so we need to explore what environments are going to give her that, are going to lift her up, and are going to support her. So I share with you one of my favorite components of social safety, and it's belonging. And I started with that. And as we kind of close this notion of social belonging and social safety, I share with you from the Center for Transformative Teaching and Learning, the belonging braid. And if you're not familiar with it, it's a really powerful tool to begin to examine for any of us where we fit within community. And do we feel that strong sense of both social belonging and academic belonging? Because they're interwoven. If Josefa's not feeling a sense of social belonging at school based on her social identity right now, which is her family structure, her family structure is changing, and you'll see those in the social identity markers. And so she doesn't feel a strong sense of social belonging. And so what's happening is her academic identity, because they're woven together in this beautiful braid, her academic identity is not in a safe space for her. She doesn't necessarily feel a sense of motivation or engagement or even self-efficacy in the classroom. And so when a classmate questions her or maybe even teases her about a mistake that she makes, she grabs the collar and she pushes. And I think sometimes we make the assumption that children are coming from a place of aggression, where really, when we unpack each of these cases for each of these children and we explore their sense of social safety, we can get to the idea that every learning journey that we have needs to be supported and buoyed up. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to give you just a minute to put it in the chat, and to what is a question that you have or an observation that you have about social safety, belonging, and connectedness within your community, so that we can generate some of those questions and bring them forward at the end to be able to have a rich conversation. So I'm going to just give you a minute of think time because that's a way we create social safety because some of us are introverts and we need just a little bit of processing time. So go ahead and take a minute and we'll collect any questions in the chat. So we will continue to look for those in the chat and we'll bring them forward at the end of our conversation together. So I put this idea up here because the next one, if we think about safety, the first one is social safety. And the second one is this idea of emotional safety. So I want to put it together with and separate it as well. And so emotional safety oftentimes gets convoluted with the idea of psychological safety. And there's lots of ways that we can nurture the idea of psychological safety. We need to make it an explicit priority, facilitate everyone speaking up, establish norms, create spaces for new ideas, and embrace productive conflict. But the reality is that what we want to drill down into today is not this big idea, Amy Edmondson's book around psychological safety. And if you haven't read it, it's a great read. And I think it really gets into the work that we do in the workplace and how psychological safety transfers into the classroom. But we want to get into the specific systems and structures of emotional safety in educational environments and in learning spaces. And so the first thing that I want to share is the importance of social emotional learning programs and curricula, that intentional skill building. So when we talk about Josefa, this is a student who doesn't have the skills and needs to build some skills. So I'm going to share another story. So last year, we began to realize that a number of our secondary students were spending a significant amount of time in the doctor. And I'm talking like hours a week that they were escaping class and they were going to the doctor. And we were trying to figure out what was going on. And we said, we don't have a social emotional screener for children, and particularly our secondary students. So we did some research, and I had previously worked with Cleveland State University, and we identified the BESS, BESS. And I'll put the link for it in the chat at the end. And I have some links for you where this information comes from, and I'll put those in at the chat at the end. But as we did this work, we assessed every child, kindergarten through 12th grade, using the BESS. And what we determined was, and parents were like, what is this? And why are you giving this? And we said, so we measure your children's academics. iReady, NWEA MAP, we measure all of those things, but we don't measure your child's emotional health and well-being. And there are screeners to be able to do that, but it takes a lot of effort and energy. And so we used the BESS. And what we found was we had a number of students based on what was happening in Ecuador that were internalizing. And we had a lot of students that were externalizing. But specifically, we had a high school group of students that were extremely high risk. They came on the BESS screener across as extremely elevated in their risk. And that had us concerned because we know that there is a youth mental health crisis, and particularly in the context that we're living in Ecuador, but also globally, we need to do something differently. And so we started to think about interventions. And we do tier 1 social emotional learning. We thought about, okay, tier 2, we'll purchase a tier 2 curriculum and we will intentionally skill build in small groups for these students. But they were still ending up in the doctor. They were still tardy. They were still late. They were still having these emotional breakdowns in the library. And we said, we need to bring in an emotional support for them that is age specific. And someone who's partially mental health support and partially social emotional learning, but also teaches some conflict resolution. And so we found a life coach who works specifically with at-risk youth. And we brought her in and for 9 weeks, and it was the most powerful intervention I've implemented ever with high school students. She wasn't the counselor. She wasn't an administrator. She wasn't a teacher. She was somebody from the outside giving students a sense of how to build in themselves. She even said to them, one of the students said, you know, Dr. Gilway, I had never thought about my limiting beliefs, but would you like to hear what my limiting beliefs are? Wouldn't that be amazing if we had been given that language in our youth to be able to identify our limiting beliefs about ourselves and then to begin to skill build around what are my limiting beliefs? And so the programs that we use, the social emotional learning programs and the curricula, those are curricula. That's the intentional skill building that we do within classrooms. We layer that with our school counselors and our school psychologists with mental health support. And then we can layer that on with conflict resolution programs like Kelso's Choice, with restorative practices. We do a lot of restorative practices at my school. We even do parent restorative conversations between two parents, and they come. We said two parents request one last week with my principal, and they said, our daughters have stopped talking and we need to figure out how to get them to speak again, but we're not in a great place either. So we need a facilitated restorative conversation. Once again, being your own self-advocate and moving beyond our limiting beliefs towards affirming beliefs with ourselves as adults and modeling that for children. But the one that comes up the most in schools is this idea of bullying prevention programs and policies, and making sure that the work that you're doing is research-based. Because so often in schools, we fall into restorative practices talks about the balance of punitive versus restorative, and we fall into the punitive space, and we don't want to. So what we're offering for children when we do this work around emotional safety is we're offering to dig in and to say, let's address the root causes of bullying. We're going to provide you resources, but also provide support for your advocates. We're going to teach conflict resolution intentionally. We have a program happening actually right now in Josefa's class to help them figure out in fourth grade, because the parents requested it, how to teach conflict resolution intentionally. But we also engage proactively in restorative practices. And I've been a trained facilitator through the International Institute of Restorative Practices now for 8 years. And it was the most powerful training I've ever been part of. Going through the training, learning how to facilitate restorative conferences, learning how to facilitate listening circles is really deep and powerful. But we also have to be willing to have the conversation with students and with families around the need for counseling and therapy. And I don't know about where you live, but I can tell you that in Ecuador, saying that somebody needs emotional support, and there is a stigma around mental health. And so we have been in international schools, we have to be really intentional in our design of mental health awareness and education to destigmatize the need for mental health supports. And one of the ways we can do that is focusing on both the proactive through well-being programs and the responsive through counseling and therapy. So as we think about emotional safety, I loved this graphic, and this is from Psychology Today, Jessica Del Pozo, but it really thinks about, if we think about in schools, emotional safety, when, where, and with whom do I feel safe enough to? And doing this audit with children, but also with the educators that we work with, because sometimes I think we forget to take care of the adults that take care of children. And I really do. And so at my school, somebody said, Jessica, what do you do for well-being at your school to build emotional resilience? I said, well, first of all, I started with Elena Aguilar's work around emotional resilience, and we build that up. The second thing is at once a month, we do a well-being day. And parents don't like it because they're like, why are teachers outside playing frisbee golf? Or why are they, doing essential oils or yoga together? Well, because that's how we build emotional resilience. Because sometimes working with your children can be really challenging, and we need to stay the emotionally regulated adult in the room, because sometimes you're not staying emotionally regulated at home, right? Because the thing that all children need is a conscious, mindful adult at home. And so we need to know in our own emotional safety and do our own work. And I'll talk to you just a little bit towards the end of how do you do that work? If you're not sure, where do you start? Because we did it with our staff. We did an SEL for adults course with my whole staff, both in Bolivia and here in Ecuador, but also with yourself, because if we can't give ourselves emotional safety, we're not going to be able to give it to others. And so it's like the oxygen mask on the airplane. I've been flying a lot recently. Are you putting your own oxygen mask on? So when we look at Castle, um, which is kind of the premier for social emotional learning, and we look at the fundamentals of SEL, what's the first thing that they talk about? They talk about safety. There's no single solution, but that those supportive relationships and promoting pro-social emotional skills can reduce bullying and isolation, promote belonging, boost engagement, and curb future violence. And if you're not familiar with the Castle framework, right, it talks about the importance of this social emotional learning at the center. But what we're working on right now with parents is they don't understand what social emotional learning is. Their children could probably define it better than they can. But when we talk about social emotional learning in classroom schools with families and caregivers and communities, we need to engage in each of these layers where we focus on self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making. And I think you would probably agree and find that your adults in your learning communities need this as much, if not more, than the students. Because when the American Psychological Association came out at our most at-risk group of people, right, are the people who don't intentionally in societally get support. And those are people who are out of college 25 to 60, because they're not receiving elder care and they're not receiving care within our K through 16 programming. So I'd like to take a minute and pause. And we're right on track in terms of timing. What I would love to do, I would love to hear, and I'm seeing some of the questions, and I think these are really, really great questions, and I want to make sure we dig into these. I'd like to just give you another minute to pause, right? I threw a lot of information at you with Castle. You will get the slides with the SEL, with emotional safety. So going back to those, what questions are bubbling up for you? Because this also helps us inform. So I'm seeing Anna just put a question in there around children on the spectrum. So Anna, we could do a whole session on SEP safety for children who are neurodivergent. And we are an inclusive school. And we have an incredibly powerful program, and people within the diplomatic community come to our school for our inclusion program. And so we could really dig into that and go deeper with that. So please put your questions in the chat, because it helps feed us. The idea of the Institute is to give resources and ideas. So I'm going to give a minute of pause, because I think sometimes we need a minute to absorb the information. So I'll do that, and then I'm going to go ahead and jump into physical safety. So when we think about physical safety, and I go to Anna's question. So Anna, in every single classroom, with us being an inclusive school, and we have probably one child in each of our ECC and elementary school classrooms that's on the autism spectrum. We're the only school in Guayaquil that has an inclusion program that effectively serves them and offers them IEPs. And so while implementing physical security, right, is a part of physical safety measures like access control systems, video surveillance, visitor management, secure perimeters, we have safe spaces all over school. So I wasn't going to do this, but this is really fun. So this is my office. And in my office, I'm going to show you my pea pod, right? So this is a pea pod, and that is a safe space for a child that needs to come to the office. We have a couple of children who have behavior support plans. And within there, we actually have a weighted blanket that's 25 pounds. And I'm going to tell you a story about a student that was in my office the other day. This student didn't feel physically safe within the classroom. This is a student with on the spectrum who has significant sensory needs and felt sensory overwhelmed by the brain break. And so the student lost it, knocked everything off of the library, broke a scale in the lab. And so he needed someplace to calm down. And we had an event happening in the library where our sensory spaces. So that would have been an additional trigger. So he came to my office and and I'm going to talk about the training that we've done with staff. We did our de-escalation process. And then towards the end, little Jaime, and I'm not going to use his real name, little Jaime was sitting on my couch over there with the shark, right? And he said, they put a weighted blanket on him. It's 25 pounds. And he said, I need more. And so they put 50 pounds on him, and he's in third grade. And he's probably about 50 pounds, but what he needed was whole body pressure. And he could identify that because we have skill built that for him. He knows his safe spaces on campus. We have the structures and systems of a pea pod and a weighted blankets in the classroom. And even this little picture that I've got on the slides, we have safe spaces. We actually have the cozy cubes. I don't know if they're the wooden ones, because behaviors expand into the space that we give them. And so we have the little cozy cubes, and each classroom has designed their own cozy cube. But those are designated safe spaces. In each building, there's a designated safe space for children. And based on their age, it's designed for them, but they participated in the design, because we can't do something to them or for them without them. Because if they don't own it, then it's not a safe space. And of course, we need to talk about emergency preparedness and planning, because when little Jaime starts throwing things, other children don't feel safe in the classroom. And so we need to have procedures for safe restraint if it's necessary, if there's self-injury, but also moving him out of that space if it's not safe and getting him to a new space. But then also, how do you clear the room if that's what's necessary? And all of that takes staff training and support. And I think Pat just named it. There needs to be an intentionality in the work that we do around this. Sometimes I think we rely on the curriculum to do the work, and we're the educators. Curriculum is not magic unless we bring it to life and imbue it with that magic. And so we have to implement proactive and responsive security protocols, both physical, but also for our children in those learning spaces. We need an emergency procedural responses. There needs to be procedures for how to respond. When Jaime has a crisis, what does the emotional deregulation and dysregulation process look like? And then you need to build tabletop exercises, build your muscle memory around it. I think one of the biggest lessons I've learned in an administrative position is developing and practicing plans and communication. Because when there's an event, like what happened with Jaime, where he threw something at another student, we need to be really intentional and thoughtful. Oftentimes teachers don't have the communication skills to say, this is what happened, this is why it happened, and this is what we're doing, without breaching confidentiality. and maintaining confidentiality. But most of all, students need to know where to gather and seek help and support when they need it. And so I'm gonna bring the three of them together, but I actually want to jump ahead to a slide because I think it really speaks to this idea of physical safety. And I think it speaks to maybe a couple of questions. So if you're not familiar, this is traumasensitive-schools.org. And I think a lot of the work that I've done is around the notion of it doesn't matter where we are or what we do or who we work with in schools, we need to be trauma sensitive. And so if you're not familiar with the Trauma Sensitive Schools program, there's a series of 6 training videos. If you click on their resources, it talks about how do you become a trauma sensitive school? What are the processes? And so it talks about the problem. It gives you the research around trauma, the impact on trauma. And so if I go to Jaime, we had a meeting with Jaime's mom on Friday to de-escalate the situation and to process. I did not realize that at Jaime's last school until I talked to mom, he had significant bullying that occurred and that he has unresolved trauma around certain triggers. But we have to have those conversations and we have to build in the structures, and we need to be the educators that look at the solutions. How do we build trauma sensitive schools to help children feel safe to learn? And then how do we get there? Because it has to be a whole school effort. Everyone needs to know, right, that that child has a trigger and that they might need different accommodations. And I was going to leave these till the end, but I think they're appropriate now. And then I'll go back to kind of bring us towards a close. But this notion of trauma sensitive schools, this is from Lesley University and the Massachusetts Advocates for Children, which also work with Harvard Law. And they are really, really powerful because this is a trauma sensitive school checklist. And if you haven't done this with your school, it is such a powerful tool to do, because the reality is that every one of us is dealing with some aspect of this. And it goes into school-wide policies and practices, classroom strategies and techniques, linkages to mental health and family partnerships, and then community linkages. The final resource that I want to share with you, and then I'll go back actually in my slides, and this helps me kind of think about the resource dump. But we did this course with Conscious Discipline with my whole staff. It's a social emotional learning. It's the power of resilient social emotional learning for adults. It's a 10-hour course. It is probably one of the more powerful courses. A lot of my staff said it made me a better person and it made me a better parent. Oh, and yeah, it helped my teaching. But if I'm a better person and I'm a better parent, my teaching is going to be better by default, right? Because I am more emotionally regulated. But the other thing is, when we started to look at students like Jaime or students like Josefa, we went this past summer and we trained someone at the Crisis Prevention Institute in nonviolent crisis intervention. And and we now know how to de-escalate successfully with nonviolent crisis intervention. We also, with our whole staff, after doing the Power of Resilience last year, this year we worked with CPI's Reframing Behavior program. It's brand new. It's research based around neuroscience. It's a year-long program. And what it allows you to do is to reframe your perspective, your awareness, your relationships, and your actions around behavior. Because I think so often behavior can be socially, particularly for our children who might be neurodivergent or just different, it can be socially stigmatizing. So I share those resources with you because I think contextually it takes us into this place of how do we integrate? When Mike and I were talking about this presentation, it's like, how do we integrate the three? The social, the SEP, right? The social, emotional, and the physical safety. And the reality is that there are people who are already doing this work. And I'm a big fan of like beg, borrow, and steal. I don't need to reinvent the wheel. Not surprisingly, the Chicago Public Schools, who are huge practitioners of restorative practices. And I often go to them and they're heavily resourced is the pillars of school safety. And look at what they've got. They've got physical safety, emotional safety, and relational trust, which is really that aspect of social safety. I feel socially safe if I have relational trust. Not surprisingly, they also have the Venn diagram that Michael and I wanted to create. I was like, oh my gosh, look, Mike, it's a Venn diagram and somebody else did it. And this is their model, right? Is that we get whole school safety and schools become, as Margaret Wheatley would say, the islands of sanity for both our children and their adults, all of their trusted adults, when we attend to the relational trust, which is the social safety, the emotional safety for everyone on campus, and the physical safety. And so we do that through intentionality around belonging, restorative justice, SEL programs, that proactive skill building, but also the physical safety. And Mike and I talk about this all the time. He came to my school and did an audit. And I wanna kind of wrap us up with this idea of like, you don't have to feel alone in it. And I think it's easy. I think at schools, we're pretty good at the relational trust piece and we're pretty good at the emotional safety piece. But I don't have a background in diplomatic security and, you know, drug gang terrorist attacks in cities. Like that's not it's trauma's not like I have trauma training, but I don't have that. And so the idea of having somebody come in, right? I can't be a prophet in my own land, to be able to engage in active supervision, cultural vigilance, saying to everyone, if you see something, say something. So I want to talk about, as we close, this idea of when we have all these skills and when we're intentional about this work, we move from being reactive, which is, oh my gosh, I don't know what to do, to proactive. So on January 9th, a year and 3 months ago, there was a narco terrorist attack in Guayaquil, Ecuador, where a series of narco gangs took over the city. And they took the television station, they went on the television station and took people hostage. I'm going to be very vulnerable and honest. Our response was mediocre. We were still figuring it out. We didn't have great communication protocols. We didn't have any of those things. So after the event occurred, and yes, we kept children safe, but we let children out of the gate with their guards who were pushy, and they were stuck in shootouts across the city, with bodyguards laying on top of them in the back of cars. Never again, right? Like and so I called Mike, and I think having that thought partner in ClearPath EPM was so powerful for me because I was able to do the postmortem and with myself and with my team to say, we were reactive. We were not proactive. And so unfortunately in Guayaquil, where it's not an easy place to be right now, on our graduation day, May 30th, we had a man shot 10 times in the chest outside of gate 3 of our campus. But because we'd done the work all semester long with our campus resiliency team, we were proactive in our response. We had our radio check system checked, figured out, and we were able to move from reactive, where we gave away our power in that first event, to responsive, where we stayed in control. And the consulate actually said to his team, why didn't you react as well as the school did? The school was so responsive and you were reactive. And it's because we did the work. We intentionally did the hard work of being mindful about our behavior and being intentional and creating spaces for reflection. Because what happens in these moments is, in order to be responsive, we have to engage with stimuli, which can be incredibly intense in our polarized world right now. We have to accept that there needs to be a pause, and then we need to respond. And that's what we were able to do very effectively. And I will tell you, we had graduation that night after the shooting, and we had the consul general and all of our families on campus because we had a plan, we had templates, we'd done the work, and we were able to respond. So as we close, what are your next steps? And then we can have a couple minutes for questions if we have time. I'm certainly happy to stick around until 9 o'clock. So the first thing I recommend, if you have done an audit or a scan of your school and developed an action plan, you need one. Because it's that audit and that analysis is what we come back to every month with our campus resiliency team. And we track our progress, and I report it to our school board because they spend money on it. You need to use the belonging braid, attend to braiding belonging into everything that you do, because that is the thing that will give you the foundation, that foundational trust that you can then build everything else on. You need to assess your and your staff's and your students' SEP safety literacy. With all the work that we've done, I did a radio spot advertising the school on what I didn't realize was radio TV the other day. And I said to somebody, this is what my daughter said to me, Mama, do you think that's safe? Talk about situational awareness. We're in Ecuador and it's radio TV. Do you really want people to see your name and your face? Now, does my daughter, she didn't say it with tears or fear. She said it from a place of situational awareness. So have you assessed your SEP safety literacy within your community, within yourself, but also within your students? And then really work to make your school an island of sanity, because it's the place where we want children to feel safe. Even if there's a maelstrom of things happening, even if somebody's getting shot outside of your school, right? Which is a rarity, not a commonality, but school should be the place that's safe. And that's what parents have said. And that's what research shows, is that your children are much safer at school than they are at home. And so thank you so much for your time today. And we'll open it up for any questions. We will share, I'm going to share a couple of links in the chat. And we'll certainly thank you so much for coming. And we hope to see you the next time for our next event. And we will be using your guidance and feedback that you give us in the chat to be able to determine what are those next opportunities. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to Mike to close us while I put a couple of chat things in the chat for you.
That was absolutely amazing. And of course, now everybody agrees with me that why you're the favorite, right? Just it's you are the living, breathing leader of SEP safety. You really are. You just in schools, you get it, and it's amazing. You don't mind being vulnerable. And then you take your own, corrective behavior or whatever you need to do. And so absolutely amazing. So thank you everybody who joined us from schools around the world. We'll be posting this on LinkedIn and the SEP Safety website. Jesse, you have anything else before we go? And what I'd like to do is ask the SEP Safety board members to stay on for 1 minute, and we'll everybody else can have an awesome day.
I guess, Mike, what I would say is if there's any specific questions, please feel free to reach out. And before you leave, please put anything in the chat that you think, as we think about future topics, I think it was Anna, what professional training might be useful for a teacher to gain a deeper understanding of SEL. So let us know. And the other thing that we can think about doing as an institute is potentially putting out some information or some infographics for you, but let us know what you need, because then we can share those resources with you. And I think that, there's so much power in the sharing of resources, and the idea of SEP safety is for us to share them openly and without, this is free on purpose, because sometimes you have to pay $100 to go to a workshop like this. And what we want to do is we want to create a space, right, for you to learn and to grow with this. So thank you all so much for your time. You'll get the presentation, and built into the presentation are a variety of different links. So great.
Yeah,
Thank
everybody.
you.